Dahomey's consolidated control of so many slave ports made it one of the most formidable slaving powers in history. So Dahomey was constantly attacking other neighboring powers or sending out slave raids to bring back captives. The result was a colossal slave population. According to some estimates, by the 19th century, 2/3 of the kingdom's population were enslaved people.
What the hell? Portray. These are the so-called African kingdoms that you people want me to kiss up to worship. Yeah. You want me to do that. What do you think I am, a fool? Yeah, I'm gonna have a lot to say in this video, a lot.
Slavery has existed in many different forms throughout history. The reduction of another human being to the status of property, used for labor at the command of another, has been a feature of almost every society on Earth until the 19th century or so. No system of slavery has attracted more attention than the transatlantic slave trade, established by Europeans to provide slave labor for their American colonies. Around 12 million souls were taken from Africa and forced onto perilous journeys across the Atlantic, where they and their descendants were condemned to a life of servitude. However, retellings of the horrors of Atlantic slavery too often turn into stories of how Europeans alone determined the course of that history. In reality, Africans were not just passive victims. Millions of them were slaves, but many others profited from, produced, and protected that slave trade. In this video, we look at the untold story of the African slave trade. Stick around until the end to learn how some of Africa's greatest kingdoms were built on the profits of slavery, and how Africans fought tooth and nail to protect it from the abolitionist European empires.
Yeah. I mean, we're only a minute in. I don't really have much to say yet. I mean, I have a lot to say, but I'm just gonna let the video play for now.
Slavery has existed in Africa for as long as recorded history. Ancient Egypt had slaves toiling away in its fields and on its monuments. Ancient Carthage trafficked in slaves across the Mediterranean, and the Ethiopian kings of Aksum wrote proudly of the slaves they took in war. Slaves were also exported from Africa for centuries before Europeans arrived. The trans-Saharan slave trade lasted for over 1,000 years and dragged about 10 million people across the desert to be slaves in the Islamic world.
Yeah. It's funny because I point this out to my Islam viewers, right? My Muslims who watch my videos. Because again, they always like to portray like Islam as this like sunshine, rainbow, super righteous thing. And then I look at them like, you realize that the Islamic slave trade had more casualties than the transatlantic slave trade. Now, I had one guy who I debated with in the comments / argued with. Same word, really and truly, debate, argue, potato. He looked at me and he said, well, okay, well, the only reason why that is because the Arab slave trade, or in this case, the Trans-Sahara slave trade, lasted like a long time, like extremely long time, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, literally centuries, right? So he was like, you compare that to European transatlantic slave trade, in the short span of a time, it had way more deaths in such a short span of a time that it almost came close to trans-Sahara slave trade. Now, that was actually a good rebuttal. That was actually quite a good rebuttal. Usually, whenever I debate with people in comments, 9 times out of 10, they usually don't really have a good rebuttal. But that was actually quite a good rebuttal. However, my rebuttal to that was very simple. The only reason why there were so many casualties was because there wasn't really much technology throughout those centuries, right? By the time European slave trades started to happen in transatlantic slave trades, technology was becoming more and more advance, which allowed like the cotton gin, right? America, and this is what I told him, America and the founding fathers thought that slavery would have eventually died off on its own and that it will become irrelevant and obsolete until the cotton gin was invented, and that completely expanded slavery even more, right? So, and plus, don't get me started on the ships that were used, right? Because he also brought up ships, which were extremely gruesome. I mean, those slave ships were so disgusting. Just, that's probably the most disgusting part of the transatlantic slave trade. But again, those type of ships and the geography were very different, right? So, they weren't being transported on ships, but they were being transported via other means, right? So again, it's like, yes, it was a good rebuttal. However, there were different factors and variables of why that is. I mean,
the Indian Ocean also had a similarly long-lasting ocean-going slave trade, with about 5 million ending up in slave ships, bound and branded for use in foreign lands. These slaves ended up as laborers, domestic servants, soldiers, or more.
Yeah, that's the thing. Also, India had slaves from East Africa, and nobody talks about this. Wow, that is absolutely insane to me. Now, this is something that I've never heard about before. Wow, the Indians love to play victim too.
Male slaves in the Islamic world were typically castrated, which meant that new slaves had to be regularly imported to maintain the population. For this video,
what the hell? What the hell? No, bro. You can't defend this. You can't. I never knew this. Wow. As barbaric as the European slave trade was, they didn't castrate them. They didn't freaking castrate. Oh my gosh. Huh. I would love to hear what my Muslim viewers have to say about this. Yeah, you can't defend that. Oh, no. No. And these are the same Muslim viewers. Some of these people are literally going in my comments and talking about, wait, hold on a second.
You went to Africa and enslaved some of your ancestors, and now you want to act like you're a Christian, kissing out to your European overlords.
Well, explain this. I really would like to hear what they say about this.
We'll focus on Western Africa, where the Atlantic slave trade was centered. West Africa was removed from the Indian Ocean trade and mostly secure from Islamic slave raids, but slavery was still a feature of life there long before the Atlantic slave trade began. A succession of powerful empires occupied the region, which all rested on complex slave systems. The Ghanaian Empire from the 3rd to the 13th century began a tradition of powerful West African imperial states and built much of its wealth through trans-Saharan trading of slaves or goods acquired through slave labor. The salt, copper, and gold that made the Mali Empire and Mansa Musa fabulously wealthy were all extracted with slave labor.
That's hilarious. That's really hilarious because I remember there's one class, African American history class, in like my 10th grade year of freaking high school. I mean, the class is honestly like BS, bro. Like rolling my eyes. Ugh. I made a mess in that class, bro. That teacher hated me. She's from the Caribbean too. She was from the Commonwealth Caribbean, well, Dominica, right? Bro. The way how she taught like these same West African empires, she portrayed them as these like super duper black countries that were so prosperous without the help of European powers, and like, you know, basically a whole bunch of glazing BS and you know, sunshine and rainbow nonsense and, you know, all that jazz, right? but never mention the fact that these empires had a butt ton of slaves themselves. Oh my goodness, bro. Also, do you see like the skin tone? I know this is a drawing, but still, do you see like the skin tone of these people? Okay, now I know some of y'all are smart enough to look at me and you can easily tell that I'm clearly mixed. Yeah. Okay, like I get comments of people frequently, literally frequently, bro, of people like bringing up slavery, like if I care, like trying to insult me, and they try to use like slavery to insult me, like I care. Bro, I don't really care. Like I'm not a pure African, bro. I'm not a pure African. Like I like to jokingly call myself a group project because I have African, European, and Indian genes in me. In fact, if you to give you an example of what I mean, right? Well, I don't even need to really and truly give an example. You just need to look at my face. Look at my face. Google like West African person. Just look at my face and just compare. You'll easily realize that my face doesn't really have a features aside from my hair that a West African has. Like if I didn't, you could literally change my hair, just put a different type of hair on my fucking head, and I would look a completely different fucking race, really and truly. Like it's really just only my hair, to be honest. That really makes it obvious that, oh yeah, I clearly have African genes in me. Now I'm probably like a good 60%, 50-60% African. The West is probably between my Indian and white genes, but I'm not as black as people think I am. Like, also a lot of y'all don't understand like what real black is. Guys, I grew up in a country where 97% of the population is colored skin, like dark colored skin, okay? Because most of the people who live in Barbados now are, descendants of the slaves that, the British imported. So growing up, it was very obvious to pinpoint whenever someone stood out. Very obvious. And I stood out. In fact, growing up as a kid, I used to be called Banana Man because my skin tone was very, very yellow. Okay, like very yellow. In fact, even when my mom, she looked at me and she was like, yeah, you weren't black when you were born. You were actually white when you were born. So, yeah, I already care. I actually saw my baby pics too. I actually was white when I was born, funny enough. It's just that I just got more of a tan over time because I lived throughout all my life. I just lived in a tropical environment all my life. And I live in Florida right now, which is, loads of UV radiation. So, I don't really care about these comments, dude, like insulting me and trying to bring up slavery. One, I literally like I'm not a liberal. I'm not a liberal. I will literally go to white people in real life, and if y'all know me in real life, you know exactly what I mean. I will literally go to a white person and be like, hey, can you see the N-word? Literally. I'll give free N-word passes left, right, and center. Like, I do not care, bro. I don't care. like everyone knew me as, that one black guy that is not really black. I don't know, different, I guess. Bro, I was literally talking to a girl the other day, and she literally looked at me and she was like, you are the most civilized black person that I know. I'm like, are you serious? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So, yeah, I really don't care about these comments.
Domestic slavery was also common, and Mali was known to import female slaves from the Mediterranean to act as domestic servants in the households of the elites. Most of the slaves were acquired through conquest of neighboring kingdoms, or tribal groups who were too weak to defend themselves from the organized imperial militaries. Successor empires like the Songhay, Jollof, and Kabu inherited the social and economic structures of slavery and continued to acquire slaves as they scrambled to establish their own territories.
Are you a lonely man?
Empires used slaves as a status symbol. An ownership of slaves came to represent someone's wealth and power. Slavery took many different forms in West Africa. Some worked the land or the mines, others served as soldiers or even political advisors. In some places, slaves were permitted to own land that they cultivated in their free time and might earn enough from this land to buy their own freedom. In other places, the lot of slaves was more miserable. In Benin, for example, slaves were regularly sacrificed to mark important occasions like the anniversary of a king's death. All of this is to say that when Europeans arrived, they did not find an empty land of scattered peoples ripe for enslavement, but complex societies and slave-holding empires whose roots were even older than those of the Europeans themselves.
Yeah. And this is the thing, bro. It's like, bro, it's funny how like a lot of black people will like cry, complain, moan about slavery, but they just really can't address the whole, African slave trade, like what Africa, like, or should I say West Africa? Honestly, just for all of Africa in general. What all of Africa, what all these African kingdoms were literally doing to its own people. Like, that's why when you get these comments of people who are like, oh my god, you kissing up to your white man. Yo, you kiss up to your white colonizers. Because how dare I be proud of my heritage? It's like, you want me do that? You want me go and worship these African kingdoms who 9 times out of 10 wouldn't give a damn about whether or not I would be put in slave. Like, they wouldn't think twice of literally enslaving me, bro. Like, these like, dude, think oh my gosh, dude. Let's continue. It's so stupid, dude. It's so stupid.
The Atlantic slave trade was started by the Portuguese in the mid-15th century. Originally, slaves were taken to Europe, but this changed in 1526, when the first Portuguese ships carried slaves across the Atlantic to their new American colonies. However, the vision of Europeans landing on an African shore, frightening a tribe of natives into submission, and dragging them in chains to their ship is not representative of what happened for most slaves. Some slaves were indeed taken in European slave raids, but the vast majority were sold to the Europeans by other Africans. The European arrival in West Africa came at the same time as the collapse of the Mali Empire. Various splinter states scrambled over each other to seize territory for themselves. The Europeans, with their firearms, offered these competing rulers a potential advantage over their enemies. In turn, the huge amounts of captives that these kingdoms acquired in their wars were useful currency to trade with the Europeans. Additionally, the other goods like cloth and ceramics that the Europeans brought were status symbols that the new African elite could use to showcase their wealth and power. Different peoples responded in different ways to the opportunities of European slave trading. The Kingdom of Congo made contact with Portuguese explorers in 1483 and traded thousands of slaves every year. The slaving relationship between the two powers was sophisticated and mutually beneficial. For example, Congolese King Alfonso I saw the Portuguese as a useful outlet for the excess slaves he acquired during his expansionary wars, and he was an eager participant in slave trading.
Yeah, pretty much. Africa, these African kingdoms just sold out their own people. There's no other way to put it. This is why I do not care about Africa. I really and truly, it's like, yeah, I know my African heritage. I'm Creole. Duh. You can't be Creole if you're not partly African. I know hell, Creole languages are used with African words. typically, at least in the New World, right? I mean, it's cool. Our African heritage is cool, but it's like, you think I'm gonna sit here? That's just dumb. That's really dumb. Really and truly, like, I'm not gonna sit here and advocate for nonsense of, oh my gosh, bro, we need to go look back to our African past, our African heritage, bro. The freaking African kingdoms didn't care about freaking ancestors and just throwing them off to Europeans. The hell? It was like, all right, it is what it is. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, dude, I don't know how many people need to hear that. A lot of people apparently just don't understand that. I'm seeing like a lot of like African people who like to play that they're victims of European colonization, bro. Bro, dude. Even now to this day, like so many of these African countries are literally still like selling out their people to Europeans. Case in point, Congo, French West Africa, and a whole lot of more places. To this day, it's like the mentality hasn't even changed, bro. It's like, dude, at least if you are a slave and you get sent off with Europeans, you have a chance of survival. Is it low? Yeah, probably. Most likely. But your survival of Africans is like, ugh. You have to pick between the lesser evils, really and truly. At least your odds of being put somewhere good is higher, I guess.
However, he also asserted his own power over it in 1526 by forcing Portugal to submit to his legal framework for slavery, which governed how exactly someone might be enslaved and provided protections for those who were not legitimately enslaved, mostly his own subjects taken by criminal raiders or opportunists. A similar enthusiasm was seen among the various Akan peoples of modern Nigeria. They occupied an area known as the Gold Coast and were similarly prolific as both sellers and purchasers of slave labor. The gold mines that made the Akan so wealthy in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries were filled by slaves they purchased from both African and European merchants. As many as a third of the population of the various Akan states were enslaved people.
Bro, what the hell? A third of the population of this African kingdom were enslaved. That is what the. Now this, I know a lot about slavery, but this blew my mind. I did not know slavery was that prevalent in Africa. Whoa. Like, I knew the Africans did it, but damn, like, even, you see, like, people will often point out how, like, Europeans imported so much slaves that it affected the demographics, and that so much of these European colonies were just mostly populated with slaves. But it's like, yo, no different for Africa.
In almost every case.
And also, this is a Gold Coast. Like, most of the slaves from Barbados, my country, literally came from the Gold Coast. So, hell, he's basically talking about some of my ancestors right here.
These slaves were from non-Akan ethnic groups. Any sense of African solidarity in the face of European slave trading was almost non-existent.
We see you.
European slave trading.
Hold on a second. Let's freaking ad came there.
People. In almost every case, these slaves were from non-Akan ethnic groups. Any sense of African solidarity in the face of European slave trading was almost non-existent.
Yep.
The ethnic divides that split Africa were far older than European contact.
Yep.
It would not be quickly.
Yep. I don't know how many people need to hear that. I don't know how many people need to hear this, bro. I don't. Like, guys, I'm sorry, but, like, you know, I'm actually grateful that my ancestors were literally taken and they were sent off into the Caribbean. Some of them were sent off as slaves. I'm actually grateful that they were sent off to the Europeans, because Who the hell knows? Like, dude, when you like realize like how many wars these African kingdoms had amongst each other, the amount of raids and all that stuff, dude, that like you'd want to leave. Like, it was brutal, gruesome, absolutely barbaric. And there's a chance that you freaking get your head sacrificed, like you said before. I knew about that. Europeans don't do that. Europeans don't go sacrificing people freaking for gods or whatever. At least Europeans went and freaking spread Christianity, which debunk all this nonsense, really and truly. And you could come in my comments yapping. Oh, you kissing the white man. No, I'm not kissing the white man. I'm saying what is objectively true.
Changed by the arrival of foreigners on their shores. There was, of course, resistance. Many European slave ships were attacked by coastal raiders, but these reactions were rare and relatively ineffective. Most of the time, these were small-scale attacks by small tribes, or villages near where the Europeans dropped anchor. It was these tiny, disconnected groups who were most vulnerable to slavery, and their shows of defiance rarely saved them in the end. One state that did turn against European slaving was the Kingdom of Benin. The Kingdom of Benin was not the Benin we know today, but a small territory in modern-day Nigeria. Initially a partner in slave trading, by the mid-16th century, the kingdom was facing a serious drain on population, especially among its men. Two rulers, Oba Esigie and Oba Orhobuga, are credited with ending Benin's participation in Atlantic slave trading and closed Benin's ports to European traders. Slavery was not abolished in the country. In fact, the Kingdom of Benin would fight to uphold domestic slavery against Britain in the late 19th century. But this kingdom shows that Africans responded in many different ways to slavery.
Yeah. Yeah, bro. Again, dude, the Africans sold off so much slaves to Europeans that it caused a demographic collapse, and this is why they were vulnerable to colonization. Like, it's actually hilarious to me whenever I see like Africans like talk about how, oh my god, wait, hold on a second.
My Europe came and exploited us. My vulnerable Africa was colonized and conquered by the Europeans. Like, dude.
Oh my freaking, like, a good chunk of why that happened was because Africa's demographics were absolutely horrendous, because these African kingdoms just kept selling off their own people into places like Brazil, the Caribbean, America, Mexico, freaking everywhere, dude, literally everywhere. And surprise Pikachu face when you realize that, wait, we don't have a population to defend ourselves.
Each kingdom and ethnic group assessed their own situations and reacted accordingly, whether that was to sell slaves or prohibit it as they saw fit.
Oh, I know about Dahomey.
Of all the slaving states of Africa, none is more infamous than Dahomey.
Yeah, I think everybody should know about this.
First emerging around 1600 along the southern coast of modern-day Nigeria, Dahomey soared to prominence under the warrior king Agaja in the early 18th century. Dahomey's ace in the hole was a well-trained and well-organized standing army, perhaps as large as 50,000 men or more at its height, which Agaja used to conquer the kingdoms of Alada and Ouida in the 1720s. Alada and Ouida were prolific slave trading kingdoms, with tens of thousands of slaves passing through their ports. Dahomey's consolidated control of so many slave ports made it one of the most formidable slaving powers in history. The colossal army pushed Dahomey towards slavery for two additional reasons. Firstly, its military culture discouraged men from non-military careers, meaning that slaves were needed to carry out other jobs like agriculture. Secondly, a standing army had to be kept occupied or else it might grow restless and rebel. So Dahomey was constantly attacking other neighboring powers or sending out slave raids to bring back captives. The result was a colossal slave population. According to some estimates, by the 19th century, 2/3 of the kingdom's population were enslaved people.
What the hell? What the hell? Holy. Nah, bro. Nah, bro. These are the same so-called African victims. Oh, yeah. These are the so-called innocent Africans that I see so many people trying to portray. These are the so-called African kingdoms that you people want me to kiss up to worship. Yeah. You want me to do that. What do you think I am, a fool? Now, obviously, not all of you. I'm not talking about all of you. I know there's enough intellectuals on my channel to know that anyone with common sense would dare not to even do that. Like, you'd look stupid. Hilariously enough, and this is probably the most ironic thing ever, the same people who say that I'm kissing up white colonizers who enslaved my ancestors, I'm kissing up my white masters, and that I should go embrace my African heritage, whatever African heritage that is, I don't even know. It's ironic because the same Africans did the same exact thing that they're talking about, the white colonizers. But yet, they think it's okay. Like, the double standards is ridiculous. Like, oh wait, African kingdom enslaving other people and brutalizing them? Oh, whatever. Wait, white European country need laborers? Huh? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Wait. You're telling me that slavery was abolished and the people assimilated? No. That doesn't make any sense. They're clearly kissing up their masters. What they should go and do instead is go right back to those same Africans who literally enslaved them in the first place and sold them off to the Europeans instead. Yeah. Like, guys, even like trying to explain it just sounds so stupid. And it's just so hard to explain. Because it's just dumb. It's just dumb. There's like no common sense. The logic between people and that, it just blows my mind. See, like, and the more I think about that, the more I just lose brain cells. Just trying to just, like, it's such a common sense thing that it's just so hard to explain, if that makes sense. Oh my god, I'm still gonna get comments of those people who say, oh, you kissing up your white masters. Oh, you kissing up your white masters. Also, you want me to go kiss up my black African masters? My dark skin black African, because I'm not dark skinned. I'm not even dark skinned. Oh yes, go kiss up my dark skinned black African masters, yeah. Oh, but that's fine?
Slavery was so endemic to Dahomeyan society that one scholar remarked it's difficult to determine whether Dahomey was a slaving gang turned into a state, or a state that existed purely for the sake of slaving. Slaves weren't just laborers and domestic servants in Dahomey, but became woven into the political fabric of the society. Ownership of slaves became a status symbol for Dahomeyan elites, as it did for others in West Africa. This led to tension between the king and the elites who fought for control over the slave trade. Although it is often characterized as a royal monopoly, even the absolute power of the monarch was not enough to rein in elites who established power bases of their own thanks to their trading of slaves. Slaves also became a part of Dahomeyan religion. The annual customs of Dahomey were a day of rituals and public celebration involving military parades, political debates, and human sacrifice of slaves to appease the spirits and protect the kingdom for another year. Hundreds of slaves were killed, usually with decapitation, and in some years as many as 4,000 people were sacrificed on a single day. A similar display of mass sacrifice was required for the funeral of a king, and might occur on a smaller scale for any number of other rituals or social events.
Yeah, I actually know about that whole freaking ritual thing. I knew very much about that. How many of these African kingdoms would literally use slaves as sacrifices and literally decapitate their heads. I know about that. Say what you want about European slavery. I will literally argue that I would rather be a slave for a European than a freaking African. Because with a European, right, it's like you're most likely going to be a laborer. You're most likely going to be a laborer. No, I'm not trying to sugarcoat that, but when I say laborer, I mean you're probably going to be working in like extremely harsh environments. But when you really and truly, when you think about it, right, a lot of places in Europe weren't any better either. Think about the Industrial Revolution and people working in factories. They worked in horrible environments. Horrible accidents constantly happened. They were basically slaves, getting dirt poor wages. So it's like, well, it's no different there. But in Africa, it's like, oh, you're gonna be used for a sacrifice today. No, like with Europeans, it's like, oh well, wait, we're Christian. Oh, we don't do that whole freaking decapitating nonsense here. Oh, great. By no means am I trying to like downplay like how bad like European slavery was. I'm not really trying to like downplay that or anything like that. No, like there were many disgusting slave masters, really and truly, who just completely were just head over their heels, who went on frequent power trips and made slaves do the most heinous things. And then there were also slaves that had to do a lot of banging to white women that were forced to bang their white slave masters. Talk about male slaves, not the female slaves. Although a lot of, graping happened with female slaves as well. That's how the first mixed babies were a thing, funny enough. Especially when mixed babies came about. A lot of the white women of the wives of slave masters, they're like, oh, so you're doing that? Basically cheating on me. All right. I'm gonna get Tyrone over there. In layman's terms. Oh, and this sentiment still very much exists. Like, there's like old white women that will go to the Caribbean, that'll use their money to try and get some of Tyrone's BBC. But yeah, that sentiment still kind of exists. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, they do it with Africans too, but usually it's like super old, widowed, or like just old white women that are, want to get down and dandy. Really and truly. So yeah, that is interesting. A lot of people tend to gloss over that. All right, let's continue.
Dahomey remained committed to slavery even as the European powers began their crusade against it. In 1818, King Gezo was forced to make concessions to the British, including the abolition of slave sacrifices, and by the 1840s, Gezo was being pressured to end the slave trade altogether, but he refused. The slave trade is the ruling principle of my people, Gezo told the British. It is the source and glory of their wealth. The mother lulls the child to sleep with notes of triumph over an enemy reduced to slavery.
Wow.
When the British managed to force—
Wow. Insane, bro. I swear, this is like how people imagine like white European taking slaves. This is unironically how people think when you hear about freaking like white Europeans taking slaves, bro. Like, unironically, these people would think, oh my gosh, this is how the freaking white Europeans felt, bro. Like, they were just so proud of taking all these slaves, man. When in reality, a lot of the way how people describe these schizophrenic people describe like white European colonizers taking slavery. A lot of how they describe that, it actually fits how like these African kingdoms treated, you know, other Africans.
Was a treaty on Gezo that ended slave trading from Dahomey.
Okay, everyone is trying to.
It was a source of bitter resentment. The Dahomeyans subverted it by selling slaves overland to be sold through ports not bound by the treaty's terms. Eventually, the resentment caused a total breakdown of relations, and Dahomey abandoned the treaty entirely by the late 1850s. They pivoted towards an alliance with France, who were less zealous in their anti-slavery attitudes, but the collapse of the slave trade would soon bring down the kingdom. As the kingdom's main source of wealth failed, it was forced into desperate raiding and conquest that antagonized the French. After attacking a French allied town in 1889, France waged 2 wars against Dahomey, citing its penchant for slavery as a legitimizing moral cause, and toppled the kingdom in 1894. A common misconception about European imperialism in Africa is that colonization and slavery always worked hand in hand. The Europeans set down their claims in Africa to furnish their endless desire for slaves. This was true at certain times. Portugal's colonies, such as those in Angola, were an important source of slaves. By the late 1700s, Portugal's thirst for able-bodied male slaves to work their American plantations meant that Angolan women outnumbered men in their homeland by at least 2 to 1. However, the vast majority of European colonization in Africa occurred after the abolition of slavery. It would be more accurate to say that anti-slavery motivated European colonization. We have already seen how France conquered Dahomey in part to end its slave trading. A similarly hard line against slavery was taken by the British. For example, in 1851, the Royal Navy lay siege to the Nigerian city of Lagos and its king Costco because the king refused to end the slave trade. After a furious naval bombardment, the British compelled Lagos to abolish the trade, forcibly freed every slave in Lagos's territory, and expelled all slave traders from their land. The British later imposed abolition on all of Nigeria. Some historians have noted that while Britain was quick to abolish trading, domestic slavery took a lot longer to root out in Nigeria. The British were concerned that moving too quickly to end slavery there would provoke unrest and resistance from the Nigerians themselves. Abolitionism was similarly evident in the British conquest of Benin in 1897. After the massacre of a British merchant expedition in January of that year, the British launched a punitive military strike against Benin City. Slavery was once again among the justifying causes of the attack and subsequent colonization of the kingdom. According to eyewitness accounts, the king of Benin sacrificed hundreds of his slaves in hopes of acquiring divine protections against the approaching British. The British
The irony, bro. The irony, bro. The irony. The British are there to free the slaves, and the so-called African victim kingdoms are sacrificing slaves in hopes that they will get divine protection from the British trying to free the slaves. Oh, dude, I wish so many people could hear this. Oh my gosh, dude. It's so ironic because people think that like so many of these African kingdoms are just such victims, bro.
populated the decimated city with freed slaves and offered total emancipation and resettlement to any slave who escaped to their territory. Benin's elites were slow to embrace the change, and British authorities were still trying to stamp out native slavery there into the 1920s. That is not to say that there weren't African abolitionists. There certainly were, not least of all the slaves themselves. But there were many in Africa willing to fight and die to uphold the ancient institution. No discussion of slavery should ever gloss over the fact that millions of Africans suffered unspeakable cruelty across the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, the Sahara, or in Africa itself. The scale of the deportations from Africa deserves unique attention, but that suffering was not solely the product of foreigners imposing themselves on a passive continent. Africans were active in their own history and helped to create, expand, and uphold the systems of slavery that shackled other Africans. The story of Africa's support for slavery is as much a part of its history as its being a victim of it. While the experiences of millions of African slaves deserves all the attention it gets, that doesn't mean we should pretend that other Africans were not traders, raiders, and rulers who facilitated the enslavement of others on their continent. Africa was not uniquely guilty or innocent of slavery, but part of a shared human story of suffering, exploitation, and eventually abolition. Telling that history gets us closer to the truth and puts African history in its rightful place in world history, as a continent full of people who are as complicated and flawed as anyone else. If you appreciated this dive into the untold parts of African slavery, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more historical content like this.
Woo! Yeah, if you made it all the way here, you like what I got to say in my videos, man, and you're new to my channel, make sure you go subscribe. If you have any suggestions for me, make sure you go and comment down below if you know that I like it. You know, I decided to just drop this reaction video. Because I don't know, a lot of idiots who probably need to see this, especially in my comments. I'm kind of sick and tired of repeating myself, so I'm just gonna refer to them in this comments, to be honest. I mean, this video. But anyways, man, go check my other reactions if you like my reaction. I have plenty on my channels. Go. Have a great day, folks. Yeah, day, because I'm gonna upload this at like, no, great evening, because this will be like 5 p.m., 6 p.m. European time.